Derek Neumeyer of McKeen's Hockey joins as we talk about three big boys that could be available for the Sharks at the end of the first round.
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, caretaker at the Reef, also the co-host of Locked On NHL. I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. Proudly part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day. If you want to be an everydayer, all you have to do is just follow wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube as well. And today we are joined by Derek Neumeyer of McKeen's Hockey, where we talk about three intriguing prospects, Jakob Ihs Wozniak, Will Horcroff, and we talk about Kirban Limitov, who is a big, all three big boys. So we're going to talk about these guys, see if they would make sense for the San Jose Sharks at the end of the first round, beginning of the second round. Continue to look in that window there with the Sharks having 2 picks there. So without further ado, let's get to it. And now we bring in Derek Neumeyer from McKeen's Hockey. We had Brock last week. Had to get Derek on this week. How's it going, buddy?
It's going pretty well. It's busy time of year for sure. We're putting on the finishing touches on the McKeen's draft guide right now. You know, the Memorial Cup is happening right now, AHL playoffs, Stanley Cup finals. You know, there's a lot of hockey to watch, a lot of hockey to write about, a lot of hockey to talk about, a lot of players to talk about. So this is the busiest time of year, but it's all leading up to the draft, which is the funnest time of year. So the reward is worth all the work at the end of the day.
Especially when your team is bad. The draft is always the best time of the year. And spoiler, the Sharks have been bad. So we're going to be continuing to focus on these guys. End of the first, beginning the second round as the Sharks now. We do know the Dallas pick is going to be pick number 30. Sharks have pick number 33. So we have some guys in that range here that we're going to be talking about. And these are all guys I know you're very interested in. So we're going to be starting with a power forward. That is Jakob Ihs Wozniak, forward, playing over in Sweden. Luleå. 6'3", 185 pounds, right-handed shot this season, 40 games in the J20, 23 goals, 34 assists. And I ask Derek, what makes Ihs Wozniak such an intriguing player?
Yeah, I think he's one of the more interesting players in this entire draft class. When you just kind of look at the overall profile of him, he actually set the J20 scoring record last year for under 17 scorers, which was unfortunately for him broken again this year by Viggo Bjork. But that was pretty impressive. He's got a lot of different tools, and he's had a lot of success so far over in Sweden and a little bit internationally as well. He's almost flown under the radar a little bit. He's a bit of a mystery because you've got a guy who's got a lot of great tools, the size. He's a good skater for his size. He's good at handling the puck. He's a good shot. He's actually one of the best players in this draft class for his one-timer, in my opinion. And he's got a lot of the results to back it up. But he's also a guy that when you watch him, sometimes he can be a little frustrating. He kind of shows up in bursts, like here or there. You know, he'll go long stretches of the game where he's quiet, and then he'll have one shift where he does something really impressive. Sometimes you watch him a whole game, and it looks like he didn't do a whole lot, but he ends up with a couple points on the score sheet. So he's a little odd in that sense because it's hard to get a good feel for what he is and what his potential is. But when you watch him enough, you start to see the potential there in some ways. I mean, I've seen some games of him this season where everything kind of came together for him, and he really was one of the best players on the ice. You know, he's very disruptive on the forecheck. He was really good on in the cycle, really physical, using his body well. I just think there's a lot there to work with, and that we haven't really seen the best of him yet. Sometimes you get players, especially guys in Europe, who have the size and they don't necessarily know how to use it in all the best ways. You know, they can be a little bit on the perimeter. They're maybe not as physical. They don't go to the net as much as they should. And for some guys, they don't need to. Like a guy like Ihs Wozniak has been able to be successful while kind of playing at a lower pace sometimes and not necessarily engaging physically. Now, that's not going to work for him once he moves up levels. At the NHL level, you have to fight for every inch of space. Guys are going to be on you all the time. You really have to dig in. And I think he can still learn that. I think there is that part of his game that can grow, because I've seen him be fired up at times. It's just not always there. And he had a disappointing showing at the U18 tournament. He had some nice goals for Sweden, but wasn't really noticeable in the final game. So, yeah, he's just a bit of a question mark. But I think there's a lot of long-term potential there. I mean, if you can really work with him and get the most out of his game, you've got a winger with size, skating ability, puck handling, shooting. And he's also played center at different points this season. Even in the playoffs with Luleå, he was a center for their 3 games. So, there's a lot of different things to like about him. It just hasn't all come together yet. But, development's a long-term thing. You're never scouting prospects just for how they are today. You're trying to project what they're going to look like in the future once they grow up a little, get more experience, and they've had time to work with like NHL staffers who are experts at development, right? They can often unlock a lot out of players that their junior teams can't. And I just think that there is that kind of potential with Ihs Wozniak. He's a guy who could go maybe even as late as the second round. But I think there's a good chance that he could be someone that outperforms his draft slot at the end of the day once, he gets to be 24 or 25 at the NHL level.
Yeah. He actually, just some of I know they're different players, but some of it almost kind of reminds me of like Phil Beestead, who had a little meh over there. But once he got to North American ice, you can kind of see his game kind of grow. And especially for a little bit bigger guy, I think sometimes, especially with the European game where there's just so much more ice and space that they just dealing with the different pace and stuff. And then when you get to North America where things are a little bit tighter, you can kind of start to see that size and stuff unlock. So from the sound of it, it seems like he's a guy who you always hear this right from every prospect, but consistency. But it seems like that's really his big thing is the thing he probably needs to work on the most over the next couple seasons during his development is just being a more consistent player, night in, night out, shift in, shift out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also important to note with Swedish players, they do a lot of traveling and play a lot of hockey in the season. Like Ihs Wozniak was in Canada for the Hlinka tournaments. He was at both of the 5 Nations tournaments, the U18 5 Nations in Europe. He was in Canada again for the World Junior A Challenge. He was in Texas for the U18s. He played, and he played with Luleå at the J20 level and the J18 level in the playoffs. He was with them for a bit in the SHL playoffs. Like, this guy's been everywhere. He's played a lot of hockey, a lot of travel, and that could be something that factors into his consistency issues right now. It's not like he was just with one team playing in one league. So that's something that kind of needs to be factored into the equation. Beested's an interesting example. I'd also say, since it's a Sharks podcast, there's elements of like Kasper Halttunen and Igor Chernyshov as well, where, these guys like in their draft years were top prospects, but you could tell that there was more that could be unlocked in their games. And especially coming to the North American side of things. And we have seen elements of that with both of those players. And I think we'll see similar kinds of growth out of Ihs Wozniak.
Assumption next year, Wozniak full-time SHL player. Is that what you're kind of hoping for his next progression?
Yeah, that would be my guess. It's hard to say for sure. If he's not up to snuff, he could get loaned to maybe a team in the Allsvenskan. Maybe he could go back to the junior level, but it would be a disservice to him if he was still at the junior level, considering he's had 2 really, really productive seasons there. He led his team in scoring both times as a 16-year-old and then as a 17-year-old. He's ready for a different challenge.
Makes sense. All right. Where do you kind of project him, kind of all things considered, where do you kind of project him in his career as a finished product?
Yeah, I would say probably a second-line winger. Maybe he can find a way to stick as a center, but I project him more as a winger. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable saying he has first-line wing upside, but it's a possibility. The production would suggest it. He just needs to find more consistency in his game. But I would say more likely it's like a second-line guy who's on your top power play. Maybe he ends up on a third line on a deeper team because he's got some two-way elements to his game as well. But I would say probably top 6 winger and power play specialist.
Makes sense. Before we continue, we talk about Will Horcoff, who's very much a jack of all trades, master of none type of player. Just need to take a quick break. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller, longer. Personally, I like the in-shell variety. I like hearing the satisfying crack. It's like snack meditation. But if you like the no-shell version, I'm not going to shell shame you. They have plenty of great options, plenty of great flavors to choose from. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. The next player that we're going to be talking about, a guy who's had a very interesting, especially the last season, very interesting path. But we're going to be talking about Will Horcoff, 6'4" forward playing with Michigan, 181-pound left-handed shot. Played 18 games with Michigan as he joined midway through the season. Had 4 goals, 6 assists with 44 shots on goal. So let's start before we talk about Horcoff and why he's intriguing. His season last year was a little weird as he played for he started, in the USNDTP and then moved to Michigan halfway through the season. What do you have any why or what's up with that?
I don't have any inside knowledge as to why that is.
It's a little weird, right?
It's a little weird.
Okay.
I'm just going to assume, in fairness, that he probably thought it was the best opportunity for his development. And he wasn't the only guy that did that. So the season prior, as a 16-year-old, he was on the same team as Cullen Potter with the NTTP. And Potter, at the start of the season, made the jump to play for Arizona in the NCAA. So he, Sacha Boumedienne, those were the 2 youngest players in all of college hockey at the start of the season, the only 2 players with 2007 birthdays. And then Horcoff joined them mid-season. So maybe he just thought it was the right thing for his development. Maybe he's ready for a different challenge. The NTDP team this year, wasn't really doing the best. They were kind of struggling a lot of the year. Not as well. They weren't playing as well as you usually expect them to. So maybe Horcoff just wanted a different environment, but it worked for him. I thought his game at the NCAA level overall was better than what he had done at with the program. He was fighting through some injury stuff early on in the season, so maybe that played a part as well. But he certainly didn't look out of place as the other third guy at that age group in the NCAA. I thought he fit in really well. I thought he fit in pretty early on with Michigan. And, it'll help him moving forward. He'll be a little more comfortable going there next season. And, yeah, he's just an interesting guy that has a lot of upside. I just don't think it's all been put together yet. We're talking about a guy who was a phenom with the Little Caesars program, being coached by his dad, Sean Horcoff. He's a guy that's had immense success so far coming up the ranks, but it just hasn't shown it as much the last 2 seasons. But sometimes when you watch him play, he'll make a big play, like a big sweeping deke or a nice power drive to the net or a really slick pass. And you'll see that potential sit there kind of shining through a little bit and you'll go, okay, this guy still has that in him. Maybe he's still growing into his body a little bit because that can happen sometimes with the really big, tall guys. So there's a lot to him that's interesting. And, maybe his choice this season to go from the NTDP to college made things a little bit more confusing with him. But when you look at the overall picture, there's a lot to like.
Yeah, kind of reading through his stuff. Physicality is a word that kind of kept coming up with him, right? Is this kind of what makes him so intriguing? It's just because he's already such a physical player at his age.
Yeah, I would say it's the combination of physicality and skill. I mean, he's not just like a guy who goes out there and only looks to hit people. Like, this is a guy that can really make plays with the puck. He's a pretty good shooter, a pretty good playmaker, pretty good skater. All those things aren't quite as polished as they will be right now. Sometimes he looks a little clumsy and uncoordinated, but I think he's making progress in those areas, and a lot more is going to happen. So it's that blending of the 2 things, right? Where you've got a guy who can play that skill game, but he's also huge. He's got reach that he can use to protect the puck. He can cover the same amount of distance in 3 or 4 strides with his skating that a smaller player might need 6 or 7, just because he's got such long strides to his skating. So there's a lot of different tools to him. He's very toolsy. very versatile, very intriguing as to what his game could look like in a few years. And, you take the fact that he's the son of an NHLer, a guy who, works on the player development side for the Red Wings and has for a long time. So like the environment that Horcoff's grown up in is very, very beneficial to, developing into a great hockey player. Some guys, it just makes such a huge difference for them. Some guys, it doesn't. So you can't put too much stock into that. But some of those guys who are raised by former pros, like their games are just, they just know how to be a pro hockey player from a very, very young age. And that gives them a huge advantage over others.
All right. So what do you, over the next couple of years of his development, what do you think is the thing that you want to see work on the most as he, works towards being a professional hockey player?
I would say it's a little bit of everything right now, because I think there's a lot of his game that's pretty unpolished. It's the coordination, it's the blending of the different skills. I would also say you want to see him develop a little bit more of an identity. Like, it's great in some regards that he's got all these different things about his game that are interesting and appealing. But sometimes you want to know what a guy is just a little bit more. You want to kind of know just, what sort of role he would fill in a team. Sometimes you want guys who are that jack of all trades. You can move them up or down a lineup. But sometimes you really want to look at a guy and know, like, okay, I know this guy can be our second line center or first line winger, or we know he can be a net front option for us on the power play because he does that every year and he's really good at it and he's worked at it a lot. So with Horcoff, I think there is a little bit of mystery with him in that regard, which wasn't helped by, the changing of his environments this season. Hopefully he gets a little more consistent usage with Michigan moving forward, and he really kind of grows into something, whether that's, more of the power forward side of things, whether he's more of a skill guy. I just want to know a little bit more about what he is and how he sees himself and what kind of player he wants to be. It's, he's still got a lot of time to figure that out, but I would like to know for sure, like, where it's going to go. That can be a positive or a negative.
He's just taking his general education classes right now. He's just taking his GE. He's going to figure it out later.
Yeah, he's not committing to anything yet. And, taking all his electives. Yeah. I do see him as that kind of player. Maybe he's a center long term. Maybe he's a winger. He's done a little bit of both. So, but that can be a positive or a negative for teams, right? If you want a guy that can be, let's say, second line or third line kind of power center, like a matchup guy, a guy who can kill penalties, a guy who's good on the net front. If it comes to where you're drafting and there's not a guy who really clearly fills that role, maybe you take a swing on Horcoff and be like, okay, we're going to try and focus on this in how we develop him. This is how we're going to try and shape him and mold him. So there can be some value to him there for teams, because you've got a guy who could be different things. And if a team is drafting for need, that can be really useful.
Well, what do you think he works out as? Like, what do you think is his path to success, I guess?
Yeah, I would say he's going to have more of a power game than a skill game, but a guy who can do a little bit of both. I think he's going to be more of like a first forechecker, a guy who's good around the net, a guy who you do want playing net front on the power play. I'd say he probably will get a lot of time at center. I think he'll be smart enough and hardworking enough and tools enough to do it. Mm-hmm. He'll probably end up maybe more like a Jordan Staal kind of player, where he's a guy who shows up on the score sheet. He's a guy who puts up points, but on a championship team, maybe he's best fitting as like a 3C, where you've got other guys who are more
super awesome 3C. Well, get it. So
I would say that's probably like the best case scenario for him long term. Like, if you want to pencil him into how he'd fit on like a championship team, you'll get a guy like Anton Lundell last year in Florida, right? Wasn't one of their top scorers, but he was just a guy who took a lot of shifts, played a lot of minutes in all three zones, was on the penalty kill, and just used his reach and his skating just to be kind of a disruptive player, a guy who was involved in the play all of the time, shift over shift. And even though it's not always pretty or exciting, there's a lot of value to guys who can just leave a consistent, steady impact.
Yeah, leave right. you leave a shift better than where you found it, right? That's something to be said. And again, it's not the sexiest thing, but right, we're especially with this draft, these kind of late first round picks, it's you're trying to find value, and I think a guy like Horcroff, who is a bit of a mystery, like you said, could be something intriguing for the Sharks as they continue to try to add as much pieces around celebrating Will Smith here, and I think Horcroff could be one of those guys. And again, got that little bit of snarl. We know Mike Grier likes that snarl too. So, yeah, interesting.
And I also will say that when you're in a situation where the Sharks are, where they have a lot of prospects, they've got a really good pipeline right now, they could take a swing on a guy like Horcoff, right? There's some risk to him, but there's also that high reward. And, if you take the swing and it doesn't work out, you still have enough other pieces in the system that you can kind of make up for it. It's not like anyone would necessarily be fired from their job if they advocated for drafting Horcoff and he didn't quite pan out because he was the only pick they had in the first 4 rounds or whatever. So
makes sense. All right. Before we finish up, we talk about Kirban Limitov, a big mobile defenseman who has some snarl. Just need to take a quick break. All right, let's switch over to the blue line, or as like our friend Half-Wall Hockey likes to say, the hardliners, which is a weird phrase, Keegan. Anyway, we're going to be switching to a big boy, Kirban Limitov, a defenseman over in Russia, playing in the MHL this year with Dynamo. 6'3", 198 pounds, left-handed shot. Please don't roll your eyes, Sharks fans. I know we have a lot of left-handed defensemen, but we're just trying to find good players. 46 games this year, 8 goals, 15 assists, 109 shots on goal. And what makes Limitov a intriguing prospect?
He's very exciting. And I honestly think he's one of the biggest wild cards for this draft class. He's kind of like a fullback or like a halfback in football, where he's giant and he's, super athletic and really fast, but he often doesn't always engage. He takes care of his own zone first, but every now and again, you give him the puck and he goes really fast. And when he goes, he's really hard to slow down. Like, it's not uncommon to see this guy, wind up and go for a big end-to-end rush with the puck, and he's pretty good at it. And he's also a defenseman with some snarl. He loves to lay a big hit. I was watching one of his playoff games this year in the MHL, and he got into a really spirited fight after the game. And he was like chirping the other guy. Like, he had like the other team like coming after him, and he had this big smile on his face. And I was like, okay. I like to see that sometimes out of some players. He's just got a big kind of persona to him. He's got a big energy. The points weren't there a ton this season, but he actually scored a lot as far as MHL defensemen go. You don't see defensemen in that league put up a lot of points very often at 17. So he actually did pretty good there. And, you look at the overall like geopolitics of the situation and how it affects the draft, right? Because you've got Russians who they're not getting seen as much by the scouts in the public sphere. They're not playing internationally. But there are still players that are coming up every year in Russia who are very, very good prospects. And sometimes, maybe these players can be undervalued a little bit because scouts haven't had the chance to see them. Last year at McKeen's, we ranked a guy named Yegor Surin in our first round. And he didn't play internationally because he played the whole season in Russia. But when we watched him on tape, he was really, really good. He was really interesting, very exciting. He got picked in the first round by Nashville, and he had a very good year this year. That pick caught some people by surprise because not a lot of people knew about him or heard about him. But Nashville did, and they liked him. And that pick is looking good for them so far. He played most of the year in the KHL, had a lot of success. So Limitov could be one of those kinds of players. They actually announced the invite list for the draft combine earlier today, the day of our recording this. And Limitov was one of 2 Russians who played in Russia this year who got invited. The third guy was Ivan Ryabkin, who is Russian, but he's playing in Muskegon this year. So, there are still good prospects to know and to watch out of Russia. And Limitov is one of them, especially as a defenseman. And when you just look at what he brings and the profile he has and some of the other defensemen in this draft class, Limitov stacks up pretty well. I would feel pretty comfortable taking Limitov ahead of a guy like Logan Hensler. You compare him head to head against Blake Fiddler. I would say they're pretty comparable, but the argument could be made that Limitov has a higher upside just because he's a much better skater and he's got more of that physical snarl to his game, a little bit more fire under him. Like, I love Blake Fiddler, but he's a little bit more calm and composed. He wants to put guys to sleep instead of firing them up and then beating them that way. So I just think there's a lot there to like about Limitov. And if this guy had been playing all season in North America with a big team like the London Knights or something like that, like, this guy would be getting a lot of attention and a lot of love. And there might be some teams that are just willing to throw the Russia factor completely out there. They just see the player, they just know what he is and how he plays. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are some teams that just had him maybe even as high as the teens on their list, just because you look at what he is and what the long-term potential is. And it's a pretty exciting package.
I just want to see Limitov and Askarov. That just sounds like a sitcom, like with their personalities. Just put them together, put on the cameras, you'll be fine. Like, just rake in the money right there with those two guys.
Almost sounds like an old vaudeville comedy troupe, like Limitov and Askarov.
Limitov and Askarov coming to the city near you. All right, so what do you want to see Limitov work on? Right, playing the MHL. We're assuming he's hopefully pushing for a KHL job. I know the KHL, they can be very, we'll say finicky with some of their young players and how they utilize them. But I know Dynamo, they handled Chernyshov pretty well, giving him, I think he got like 30 or 40 games and he performed well. But that's kind of the next step for him, is playing KHL. And then what do you want to see him work on here over the next couple seasons?
Yeah, I definitely hope to see more KHL action out of him next year. I think he played one game this year in the KHL, or dressed for one game but didn't play. I forget exactly which. So, that would be the big step. It seems like that league is getting a little more progressive in how they view that. Dmitry Simashev this year played a lot there. Anton Salayev played a lot as a 17-year-old, and then again this year. Overall, I would just like to see better work with the puck. Sometimes he can be a little erratic, some passes to nowhere, throwing it away a little too soon under pressure. I think he's good at skating it out of trouble, carrying it out of the zone on breakouts, but he's not necessarily good at his breakout passes. Sometimes he sends it into traffic when it shouldn't be, but so puck management overall, I guess you could say, is a part of it. Sometimes he can overhandle it a little bit, especially when he's trying to fly. Like, it's great that he's can go a million miles an hour and wants to bring the puck with him and do something fun. But you also don't want your defenseman turning over the puck too often at the offensive blue line, and then everyone has to chase back. So there's definitely some work that he needs to do there. But overall, I think it's better to have a guy who can do it and shows a willingness to do it, because then you can often kind of refine it with them, as opposed to a guy who just can't and won't. Sometimes some defensemen just could never play that kind of way, could never be options in the rush, no matter how much time you spend with them and how much you work with them. So I like the fact that Limitov has elements of that in his game and is willing to do a lot more of it. So that's a good sign, I think. But overall, I'd still say it's going to be the defensive side where he has the most impact. Just being a physical guy, being a guy who's good with his crossovers when it comes to defending against the rush, using his reach to steer opponents into the corners or get a stick on pucks. I think he's got a lot of upside as a guy who could get defensive stops both on the rush and in the cycle with his skating and his reach and his physicality. But it'd be nice to see him manage the puck a little bit better, because once you get forechecked hard in the NHL, stuff can go sideways real fast, and defensemen need to have the poise and the know-how to handle those situations.
Makes sense. All right. Where do you kind of see him topping out as, or kind of fitting into a team's blue line?
Yeah, I could see him as a second pair defender, I would say. Okay. Probably not a guy who gets a lot of time on the power play, but definitely a guy who could do a lot of penalty killing. I think he's athletic enough that he can log a lot of minutes as well, which is nice. Like, you want guys that you can throw out there for a lot of minutes in a game, and they're not going to get worn down or gassed or get caught in their own zone too easily. And I think he's that type of player. He would probably need the right sort of partner on a pair. I would say he's probably more of like a number 4 defenseman than a number 3, but a number 4 that you could roll over a lot if you needed to. Because you see that sometimes with teams where they'll shorten their bench and only have 2 pairs, and all those 4 guys are getting like 23, 24 minutes per game. I could see Limitov being that kind of second pair defenseman where, maybe he's not one of your most used players and he might need the right kind of partner to be truly successful, but he's a guy that you could probably use quite a lot in a game, and especially like in a deep playoff run. He seems like the type of guy who's really well equipped for playoff hockey. And I think he'll be pretty excited and could be a bit of a fan favorite on a team that goes far on a big run like that.
Makes sense. Especially, we're already penciling in Dickinson to play 40 minutes a night, so it'll be fine. He could just play the other 20 on the left side.
Yeah, there you go. No problems.
No problem. I mean, he's already doing it with London. What happens when you go?
Yeah.
Just keep doing the NHL. So,
Derek, maybe Mukama Doolin as well.
Yeah, there's plenty. We'll figure it out. So, Derek, thank you so much for your time. Where can the people find you? What do you got coming out?
Yeah, Twitter, or X, I guess you could call it, but I'm always going to keep calling it Twitter.
It's Twitter.
It's Twitter is the best place to find me. It's kind of the hub for all my stuff. I work for McKeen's Hockey. We've got our draft guide coming out. We've got a lot of other content coming up as well, including some stuff on our YouTube channel, which we're trying to get off the ground a little bit more. But Twitter is the best place to find me, just because that's kind of an accumulation of where everything happens. I'll be doing media hits and various interviews and stuff in the lead up to the draft, and I'll try and share all of that there. So I'll be talking about a lot of prospects for this year's class. You can find me at Derek_N_NHL, and I will try to keep my audience as informed as possible and be as fair as I can in the prospects that I talk about.
Unlike Pete DeBoer, who just throws Jake Oettinger under a bus. So, noted Stars fan, Derek. Enjoy your off season, buddy. Thank you so much. We'll talk again soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Want to thank Derek for spending some time here, hanging out, getting to know some of these prospects here. Limitov is very interesting, and I know you're rolling your eyes about the left-handed defenseman because, again, we have 7,000 left-handed defensemen, but that feels like a Mike Grier type of player there, and we know Mike Grier not afraid to draft Russian players. Limitov does feel like a Mike Grier type of player who I think the Sharks would be very intrigued in. So, but thank you to Derek for hanging out. We'll continue to have more draft profiles next week. So make sure you guys are following along wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch on YouTube as well. Follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at My Fry Hole. Till tomorrow. Bye, friends.